Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to talk about drawing from memory and drawing from an actual reference. And here you can see in this photo, we're going to draw the left-hand side cherry from going by an actual cherry, and the right-hand side cherry was one I just drew from my imagination after I got my Arteza Everblend 120 set. I wanted to test it out, and I didn't have anything to go by, and I was just doodling, and that was the best cherry I could do from my imagination with markers, apparently. So I noticed I had some cherries left in the fridge today, and I thought that's just something I felt like drawing. I turned the camera on. I wasn't sure if this was actually going to be a legit Sketchbook Sunday, but then, I was like, this really explains why it's great to work from reference, whether it be an actual thing or a photo of something. So I'm starting off by using some really different shades of gray markers to get my tonal values down, because that cherry is so dark. It's like a really dark wine color. I thought that the reds that I had wasn't going to give me the richness that I needed, so I decided to do some underpainting and also do the cast shadows with some really pale gray markers. There is a large selection of grays in the 120 set of the Arteza Everblend markers. Their 60 set has more of your bright tones and your clean tones, and the 120 set has all the colors from the 60 set, but it also has neutrals and gray tones as well. I'm working in my render sketchbook, which, as I've mentioned every time I've used this sketchbook, is this paper does not blend, but it layers like a dream. So I am layering up the different shadows. Now, if you look at the cherry that's just resting there on my sketch pad, you can see, because of the lighting that I have over my table, I actually have like 3 different shadows there, but I think that looks really cool, and that's what I wanted to capture. And like I mentioned, I didn't know if this video was going to make it onto YouTube or not, but it was something I just really wanted to draw. I figured it might be kind of boring for anybody else to see, but I wanted to play with this concept here. And I also wanted to use those really, really pale grays and see if I could reserve shadows and how that might help me keeping my values correct as I went to color. I really like using the chisel end of the markers on this paper. I find that it flows really well. The ink stays wet long enough that you can, get a streak-free coverage. Like I said, not blending, but streak-free, and the layering is really nice. I noticed that there's quite a shift between wet and dry on this paper. So that's something you want to keep in mind when you're doing things. Like when I first went in and did those cast shadows, I was a little nervous because they look so dark, but you can see they mellow out and they get pale as they dry. So just kind of keep that in mind. You're going to find that that's the case with a lot of different papers with your alcohol markers. Now I am going over with different shades of red to build up my tones, and I find that if I keep glazing over the highlight areas, then it tones them down a little bit so they're not so brash. You can see on the real cherry, it's very subtle. Now I can see more tonal values sitting here at my table being close to the cherry than the camera's picking up, unfortunately, but you can kind of get an idea of what I'm seeing by my illustration, since I'm drawing it like twice the size that it is. I find that using the grays is really helpful for building up, and if you don't have a lot of markers, investing in a nice set of grays will really help you. Now, grays generally come in cool versions or warm versions, or they may have blue versions or green versions, with different subtle undertones. But if you have a good set of cools and warm grays, that's going to do a lot of your subjects. I think the cool grays are probably a little bit more useful than warm, so if you got to start off with one type of gray, like you're building maybe an open stock collection from one of the open stock marker brands, I would start with your cool grays first, get a selection, usually comes like cool gray 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., and then do your warm grays. French grays are a little bit warm. I know you could do French grays or warm grays, and different companies offer different options, but you can see by building up the grays, I'm able to get a really nice tonal gradation of color and get that richness without having to have a bazillion reds. There are a lot of reds in this set, but I honestly think that doing your underpainting with the grays, almost in a grisaille fashion or grisaille fashion, really makes your illustration look more three-dimensional and realistic. Now I'm going in with some colored pencil to kind of bring out some areas where I wish I'd left a little bit of light. And I also have this paint pen, but the thing I find with a paint pen is that on this paper, and with the alcohol ink is seeping up through the pen. So I decided I was going to work more with a pencil. And pencils are great because you can get those cast reflections, and that's when like the light bounces off the surface of the the object your subject is sitting on, in this case a white piece of paper, it bounces and reflects that white of the paper up onto it. So that's a cast reflection. So light bounces around in really interesting ways, and when you capture the light and how it's reflecting, that's when you start to get that roundness. Now look at how round this cherry that I'm drawing now looks compared to the one that I did. Now obviously I didn't use colored pencil on the other one, but even before I put the colored pencil on, the one on the left that I'm doing right now looked a lot more realistic. I really like adding colored pencil over my marker illustrations. I think it really allows you to get a more rich color, and it allows you to work backwards. Like if you're working light to dark, it lets you go back to light again, especially with like a Prismacolor colored pencil like I'm using here, since they tend to be a little more opaque. Any of your waxier pencils will be a little more opaque, like your Derwent Color Soft is a nice opaque version. If you're on a budget, the Prang colored pencils are a really nice option. The Arteza ones aren't as opaque, but they'll certainly work. But they're just not as opaque as a Prismacolor. Neither are the Polychromos. So I also used a little bit of really kind of like pale warm gray here, just because I was finding that my shadows were getting a little too blue. And I think that's just because of all the reds were very cool that I used, and the grays were very cool. So, you know, just keep layering and burnishing. You can't layer too much with pencils on this paper because it's so slick, but you can certainly do quite a bit. Now, an issue that I've had on this paper is sometimes, because it's so slick, it's not like glossy, but it's very, very smooth. Sometimes my pencil or my marker or my paintbrush, whatever I'm using, will slide out a line, and then I have to make my object a little bit larger because I've just like kind of gone outside of the lines. So it's something to kind of consider when you're using this paper. Just keep in mind your hand might slip. It's like wearing ice skates. It's really a slick paper, but it's really fun to use, and I thoroughly enjoyed building up the layers on this. This sketch took me about 35 minutes in real time. I actually had no idea how long I'd spent on it until I looked back at the footage, because I was just having so much fun. I wasn't even paying attention. Now here's an interesting thing that happens with the white paint pen over the alcohol pens. It will leach up color, and the weirdest thing was that I was noticing that the colors leaching up was like a yellow. So I just let that dry and went over it again, and that solved that issue. And that is how I sketched that cherry. Make sure you use references as well as your imagination, so that you can really record some good information, because memory is only so good. You gotta have references sometimes. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the Sketchbook Sunday. Until next time, happy crafting.